This podcast may contain graphic and potentially upsetting content related to true crime and the paranormal. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, I'm Corinna Harrod and this is the Monday Night Review. Hello and welcome to episode 159 of the Monday Night Review. I had a week off last week. I've just finished a month-long stint of not having a day off. Today is my first day off. I have pottered. You can tell I've been pottering when there is a bin bag in every room. Never quite get filled because I wander off, and I am seriously in need of a nap. I've got that sort of slight glandy feeling in my neck, which makes me wonder if I've got some lurgy brewing. I don't have time for lurgy. I'm back to work tomorrow. Last week just didn't happen. I was going to go to the United States to do one of the states of the United States, and I'd bitten off more than I could chew. So today's case is horrible, but it's not the one I was going to do last week. I love to do a recommendation, and this week's recommendation, I've just finished a book called Hello Beautiful, which I really loved. It's not true crime. It's not any kind of crime, and it's really not the sort of book that I would usually read, but it was just lovely. It was the tale of 4 sisters in America. Just beautifully done. Really got into it. So that's my non podcast adjacent recommendation. Hopefully you'll be able to hear lovely spring-like sounds of birds singing and everything. I'm in my office. I have my bin bag, and I have the doors and windows open to give it a spring airing. But I do live next to a road, so there's constantly bloody cars. I am very deeply suspicious of electric cars because you can't hear them. I think they're incredibly dangerous. But when you live next to a road, some part of me is like, bring on the electric car. Did you hear that? What's that, a robin? Bloody hell. Right. Today we're going to Austria. I'm going to issue a trigger warning for kidnapping and abduction and rape, because that's basically what this story is about. I'm not going to go into any gory details about particular abuse suffered by the victim, but I know that for some people this can be a not very pleasant subject. So that is your warning. Natascha Kampusch was born on the 17th of February 1988 in Vienna, Austria, to Ludwig Koch and Brigitte Cerny, and her parents separated when she was 5 years old. So she had a childhood that was divided between her mother's home in Vienna and her grandmother's home in Schönbrunn. My Austrian is not good. I know that I may surprise you when I say that, but I'm very sorry for my mispronunciation throughout this episode. So from what I can tell, Natascha went to school in Vienna, so that's when she was with her mum, and I think maybe she went to her grandmother's for the holidays. And when she was at her grandmother's, Natascha made friends. They did cycling, picking cherries in the garden, playing around with neighbourhood kids. They did normal kid stuff. But when she was in Vienna and living with her mother, she was a bit lonelier, I think. Her mother was a trained seamstress. She had 2 half-sisters from her mother's previous marriage who were 19 and 20 years older than Natascha. And her mother is described as energetic and resolute, rarely showing emotions and intolerant of perceived weaknesses. I would say that when you see her mother interviewed, she still gets upset talking about this. She doesn't come across quite as hard-nosed as everything I've read implies. Natascha's father, in contrast, Natascha's father, who was a baker, was cheerful and affectionate, but he struggled with work commitment and he was an alcoholic from what I can tell. So I think he was very loving and kind, but not a stable parent. As a child, Natascha was often lonely. She watched telly, she watched various programs. She didn't have a lot of supervision. I believe what everyone basically says about her mother being tough, I think she was sort of, as a lot of kids with single mothers are, you have a lot of responsibility for yourself. On the morning of the 2nd of March 1998, 10-year-old Natascha left her family's home to walk to school. She didn't usually walk to school by herself. I think she usually went with a friend, but for some reason, whatever reason, the friend didn't go with her that day. Her mother watches her out of the window. It's not a very long walk at all. And her mother watches her go down the road until she can't see her anymore. And that would be the last time her mother sees her for a very long time. Natascha never arrives at school, nor does she come home. When she doesn't come home, her mother is very distressed. I don't believe that she was called by the school to say that Natascha wasn't there, but you would assume that if a child doesn't turn up for school, especially in 1998, she's unwell, she's not coming to school, and the mother has forgotten to call. But when she doesn't come home, her mother gets really panicked and calls the police. And the police quickly discover that a 12-year-old girl witnesses a girl matching Natascha's description, wearing a red raincoat, which is what Natascha was wearing, being forced into a white minivan by 2 men. And a massive police search ensued. To add to this panic and the difficulty of finding a child in a city, Natascha had her passport with her. They had been on a family trip to Hungary a few days before, and she still had her passport in her bag. And this meant that the search basically had to be spread abroad because she obviously could have been taken anywhere. 776 minivans were examined, including that belonging to Wolfgang Pricklapil, who lived about half an hour from Vienna in Strasshof an der Norben. Pricklapil claimed that he was home alone on the morning of the kidnapping and that he was using the minivan to transport construction debris. His explanation satisfied the authorities at the time. No further action was taken. He has no criminal record. And I think the thing is, with an alibi, is quite often innocent people don't have an alibi because do you remember what you were doing last Tuesday morning? Do you know what I mean? I think it's more typical for people to not really have a good alibi unless it's you work in an office and you have regular working hours and therefore you have colleagues. Meanwhile, rumours swirl around what could have happened to the missing girl, including tales of organ harvesting, paedophile rings, and the inevitable suspicions falling on the family. As years passed, people started to assume the worst and that Natascha would never be seen again. Her mother said it was, quote, like the earth had just opened up and swallowed her. And in a way, it had, but Natascha was still alive. And her mother said she knew her daughter was still alive. She never felt like her daughter wasn't alive. And her mother had to put up with people. I believe her mother was remarried or in a long-term relationship. And the main rumour about her mother was that her mother wanted, the freedom to embark upon and enjoy this new relationship, which she couldn't do encumbered with a 10-year-old child. And so she had disposed of her daughter. But she seems to be incredibly resolute and just focuses on getting her daughter back. Natascha Kampusch was being held captive by 35-year-old Wolfgang Pricklapil in a concealed cellar beneath his garage with an entrance hidden behind a cupboard. The room had been specifically made. It's only 5 meters squared. That's 54 square feet in size. It's soundproofed, it's windowless, and with a reinforced concrete and steel door. You had to go into the garage, move a chest of drawers to the side, then pull a safe out of the wall, then reverse through a small hole, really small hole, like a man on his hands and knees. That's the size of the hole. down a ladder, through a concrete and steel door, which you then had to shut to be able to open the doors to this hidden room. And that's where she was kept. She didn't know what time of day it was. She didn't know when the man would come back. If he had left some of the doors open, so if he'd gone out and left the steel and concrete door open, he would be able to hear her knocking. But most of the time she's just in this soundproof hole under the garage. And he takes away and burns her shoes within the first couple of days, saying you're not going to need these anymore. And he leaves her with a thin blue blanket and rubber and foam mattress that's just 5 centimetres thick. And that's where she's trapped. After the first week or so, he installs an intercom so that she is able to communicate with him. I believe there's a loo and a sink down there and a little desk area and a bed. But, I mean, it is tiny. And when I say that it is 5 metres squared, that is, I mean, it's got such a low ceiling. It's just, I mean, it makes me feel claustrophobic just looking at the footage of it. So because it's got a sink and a loo, it is humid, it is damp, and it's musty smelling, and mould grows down there, and it is full of insects. It's cold and damp. There's a ventilator that's incredibly loud, and when it rotates for a very long time, it overheats. The blades start to melt, and then it makes an even louder noise, and eventually the fan breaks. And that's that. She has all electricity to the room is switched off at 8 o'clock. So I suppose at least the only benefit to that is once those lights go off, you know it's 8 o'clock at night. It must be, I mean, natural light deprivation and natural air deprivation are really forms of torture. Natascha would later say she could almost sense him coming before he did. She could hear that she would sort of get this horrible feeling, and then she'd hear the sound of the safe being unscrewed, and she'd know that he was on his way. This room is tiny, it's claustrophobic, it's grim. It would take him about an hour to get to her. 45 minutes to an hour to get to her. I mean, that tells you how, when I first read about this, I thought, oh, it's just a sort of soundproof room in part of his garage that's like hidden behind a false wall. But this is another level. It's just grim. A friend of Prikopil's who he'd worked with, they'd trained together. Then this friend, who I believe is called Franz, he sets up his own company and he gets Prikopil to work with him. And a few months before Natascha's kidnap, Prikopil asks this friend what is best to insulate a room from the sound of a hammer drill. And the friend tells him, he says, you know, concrete is really good, but also there's, I think it's this kind of wool stuff. And he says he was horrified that later, when all the truth came out, he was horrified to find that Prikopil had used all the things he'd advised in the room. Meanwhile, police receive a tip-off from a police dog handler who says that some people have come to him and have said their reclusive neighbour is suspicious, and they think that he needs to be looked into. He has a white minivan. He lives alone. He has a lot of electronic security. He is known to have a preference for young girls, and the police get ready to go and check out this man's residence. But they then have a look, and their records show that he has already been spoken to by the police. His van has been checked, and the address that the neighbours give is registered to this man's mother, and he is just in fact staying there. So they decide they don't need to go, and this is kind of then put off to one side and never looked into again. And this man is Wolfgang Prickapil. This, suggestion by the neighbours that he might be up to something is just filed away and forgotten about. Natascha's mother at this time said that, when she was dusting her daughter's photographs and looking at them, she would say, quote, "Don't give up. You are a strong, strong child." And she would often have to go with the police to identify things to see if they belonged to her daughter. So shoes, underwear, anything that they found that could have been dumped by someone or, fallen off a girl that was being abducted or anything. And she says she was always very thankful that they did not belong to Natascha, but, who did they belong to? And an incredible sense of sort of guilt that you're relieved that this item that belongs to someone else who might be in trouble doesn't belong to your daughter. So for the first 6 months, Natascha is not allowed to leave the room at all. And then gradually she was allowed to be in the rest of the house, except for at night or when Prickapil was at work, when she had to return to the room to be locked in. Now, initially he closed the blinds, and she was, when she's allowed out, she was so excited about seeing daylight. But she gets upstairs to the house and he's shut all the blinds so that she can't see out or people can't see in, and she can't get tempted to escape. But slowly he integrates her into his household, and she cleans for him and she prepares food for him, and he is sort of obsessive about cleanliness. She would be punished for leaving a fingerprint anywhere, not only for the obvious reasons of evidence that she is there, but because he's just obsessed and he doesn't want a fingerprint to be seen on anything. She has to wear rubber bags on her hands and on her head, painfully clipped to her hair and her scalp, so that she eventually cuts her hair short. And when he sees that she's cut her hair, he cuts the rest of it off. He says, "You might as well have no hair." Very interestingly, when she's interviewed, she's like, I was imprisoned, but my mind was free. And I think that attitude kept her sane. My body is in prison, but my mind is free. And she wants to learn. She seems to be quite keen on learning. She's given books to learn from. And she would get him to write her tests that he would then mark and be very cruel about. But she was like, I wanted to learn. I wanted to retain information. And she says philosophically that her time in captivity spared her many of the bad habits that teenagers form. So smoking, drinking, hanging out in bad company. But, she describes the room in which she's kept as a, quote, place of despair. And I would argue that the smoking and the drinking and the keeping of bad company is a sort of rite of passage that nobody should deny you. It's ideal to not start smoking, but you should be able to make that choice for yourself. She has a TV and radio, but initially she's only allowed to watch shows that have been pre-recorded so that she doesn't have any information about the search that's going on for her, because obviously this is all over the news. She says, quote, "There were times when the torture and humiliation was so bad that I would run to the window and call for the police. He would then grab, choke and hit her and shut her in the room." Natascha said Prickapil hated people but was nice to them and submissive. He's described as being quiet and introverted, but at home to Natascha, he was mean and incredibly controlling. I think this is one of the things that was very confusing to people who knew Prokopil, was that he's this quiet, unassuming, submissive person who has this huge secret. Natascha says she forgave Prokopil everything basically as soon as he did it. Had she not, she would have been so filled with hate that she felt like she would have exploded or done something silly. She realised that he was suffering from an illness and that he couldn't help it, and it made him weak and unstable, and for this, she therefore forgave him his behaviour. It was not the behaviour of a normal man. She is quite incredible in that way, because I don't know many people that would be able to forgive their abuser as soon as he does, something terrible to her. At one point, Prokopil's colleague Franz meets Natascha when Natascha and Prokopil go to pick up a trailer. And to him, she seemed relaxed and happy. And Prokopil said this is just a family friend. And by this time, Natascha had not only grown up, she was 10 when she was taken, but her picture hasn't been in the paper as much. And she's told to, be nice, behave, otherwise I will kill you. And so she smiles and she's nice, and she says, I had no idea who I was meeting. This could be his accomplice. There's no point in me saying anything, because if this is his accomplice, I'm going to be double trouble. Every now and again when you see her interviewed, there are just certain things that she says that make you it really hit home what she's endured. So when she's been there for years, she's allowed in the garden for 10 minutes with him, and she just describes the joy. She describes the joy of feeling the wind on her skin, because she's like, there's no wind inside, there's no breeze. So just the joy of that feeling, and the feeling of the grass. And she asks to take a branch from the hedge down to her room so she can remember what it was like to be outside. After she turns 18, she's allowed to leave the house with Prokopil, but he says if she tries to escape, he'll kill her. If she speaks to anyone, she'll kill her and the person she spoke to. She would later say that she tried to signal to people when she was out, and nobody ever really noticed. And she was like, I mean, she was incredibly thin. One of the ways that he treated her badly, I mean, it's not like he absorbed her into his household and looked after her. She was fed the bare minimum, and he would say, you don't need more, you're just in that room all day, so you don't need more food. And he would make a point of showing her all the food in the house and all the food in the fridge, and then give her a tiny amount. And so she was this thin, gaunt looking person. She was like, people probably just thought I was mad or unwell because of the way I looked. She says at one point, I believe she moved out of his she jumped out of his moving car, but he got her instantly back in. She endured physical and psychological abuse during this time, spending a lot of time doing housework and cooking for Prokopil, who often beat her so badly she could hardly walk. He rationed her food to keep her weak and repeatedly raped her. To keep her under control, he also told her that doors and windows were booby-trapped with explosives. He told her he carried a gun and he would kill her and anyone she tried to elicit help from. On the 23rd of August 2006, 8 years and 5 months after she'd been abducted, Natascha is cleaning Prokopil's car in the garden, and he receives a call on his mobile phone while she's hoovering the inside. And because she's hoovering, he can't hear what's going on. And so he moves away to be able to carry out his conversation. And suddenly Natascha realises that she is out of his eyesight, and so cleverly leaving the vacuum cleaner going, she takes the opportunity and she runs. She stops numerous people who kind of ignore her because, again, she's like, I'm this skinny, tiny, ill-looking person. She hasn't seen daylight properly, so she must have been incredibly pale. And eventually she knocks on the door of a 71-year-old's house. They open the door and she says, I am Natascha Kampusch. And the 71-year-old immediately knows who that is. This is the girl that's disappeared, that's been all over the papers, that vanished into thin air. This person calls the police, and the police arrive within minutes. Natascha is taken into the police station. She's identified by a scar, and then later by her passport, which is still in the room in which she'd been held captive. Though she's in good physical health, she's incredibly underweight. She'd gained just 7 pounds over the 8 years. So if you think about the difference between a 10-year-old and an 18-year-old, to just have gained 7 pounds is shocking. So she hasn't grown very much height-wise, and she's just barely put on enough weight. Meanwhile, Wolfgang Prickpill comes back to the van, realises that Natascha has escaped, and decides to take matters into his own hands. He had worked as a communications technician for Siemens. He was a sort of quiet, spotty type. He drives his BMW to a car park near the Ven Nord station, where he lies down on the train track and a train runs over his head. Though the police had interviewed him initially, they had no reason to suspect him. He had no criminal record, and had they searched his home, there's no way they could have found the secret room. I've seen it. I will try and find a good photo of it. But I just don't think there's no way they would have found the secret room. Maybe if they'd had some scent from her and a good sniffer dog, but they wouldn't have heard her. It's not like if she had managed to hear someone that they would hear her. It's just completely... it's frustrating that they didn't ask him sooner. And she herself says that she had to look after him when he was ill. She was allowed out to cook for him and look after him, but she was then locked back up. And it was like, she said when he was ill, it was like he forgot my needs completely. And she was like, she says something in such a matter-of-fact way, but she says, if something had happened to him, if he died, I would have died in the cell like a mummy. Just died downstairs with no one knowing I was there. When she's told of his death, Natascha is inconsolable. Natascha Kampusch says she's not a victim, and she actually felt abused by the press almost more than Prickpill, who she knew was mentally disturbed. When this story comes out, they're immediately asking her whether she's been raped, what the abuse was. They want all the info, and she finds this incredibly intrusive and unnecessary, and she finds that almost worse. She just wants people to treat her normally. Now, some psychologists have suggested that she had Stockholm syndrome, which she has vehemently denied, saying they can't comprehend her relationship with Prickpill. But I really understand this. It was an intense personal experience between two people that is completely unique, that nobody can understand. But I think that also slightly sums up what Stockholm syndrome is. It's this building of a relationship beyond captor and captive, where had she been released after a week or 2 weeks or whatever, she wouldn't have such a great understanding of him, and they wouldn't have developed this rhythm of life. and there wouldn't be this room for necessarily for forgiveness or sympathy that she has for him. And for me, I think she probably does have Stockholm syndrome, because I feel like Stockholm syndrome is quite vague. You know, there's elements of empathy and understanding that we as the outsider looking at this situation can't comprehend. I can't comprehend any sympathy for someone who had treated me like that. It's not, she realizes that he was cruel to her. She says, you know, he's there, he has enough money to drive this BMW, and he, you know, the amount he spends on petrol would feed me for a month, and I'm starving. And, you know, so she realizes it's not that she doesn't realize how cruel he was and what an abuser he was, but she has this incredible understanding that he's not well. He's not a well man. And this is not the action of someone who is mentally stable, and therefore he deserves her sympathy. What a lot of people can't comprehend is the house where Prikopil lived and where Natascha was held had been built by his grandfather during World War II. And the room, it's thought, was originally there as a bomb shelter, but obviously it didn't have the concrete and steel reinforced door, and it wasn't behind the safe and everything. It would just have been a room where you could go should your house have a bomb dropped on it. And after Prikopil's death, Natascha buys the house from the estate. Initially, she says, to stop it being vandalised or pulled down. I guess it's to stop sort of goggling tourists who want to see what's going on, where, you know, the gory details. And she goes there more and more often, and it's sort of, I don't know, I love the fact that she just wants, she says at the beginning of the documentary how she feels like she has a victim or crime victim stamped on her forehead, and she just wants people to see her as a normal person. And I think one of the reasons it's hard for people to see her as a normal person is because she has incredible mental strength to have endured what she's endured and have empathy and sympathy for the man who did it. But also she sort of, I don't know, I feel like I would want that house burnt to the ground. But she doesn't. She still owns it, as far as I know. In 2011, she had the cellar filled in, and she's an incredible woman. I'm not going to go into what her life is like today, because she deserves that privacy. It feels kind of weird I know that she'd probably hate someone doing a podcast on it. She's written a book called 3096 Days, which is obviously how long she was kept captive for, which tells her side of the story. But for me, I just thought, I'm not going to go into her life now, because she deserves that privacy. But I just have, it's such an incredible story of endurance and mental strength, and just kind of a worst case scenario that actually happens more than it should do. Women especially, I'm sure it does happen to men to a certain extent, but women being held captive somewhere, and in this case in this tiny room that is just the stuff of nightmares. And that is the story of Natascha Kampusch. I hope I don't give you nightmares. It's very hard to explain until you see it, the situation, so I'll try and find helpful photos to put on the Instagram and Facebook. And thank you so much for listening. As always, you can email me, theMondayNightRevue@gmail.com. You can check out merch through the link below, my book recommendations through the link below. I'd love to hear from you, so do email or send me a direct message. And until next time, be kind, stay safe, and always check the backseat. before you drive.